All right, I don't have time for this. I'm totally exhausted, and I'm really mad about having to do this video because there was other stuff I was going to do today. I was going to start talking about freedom of speech, but I can't talk about freedom of speech because none of y'all motherfuckers know what it is, or where it comes from, or why it's in the Constitution, or what the Constitution is, or what a country is. I told people that they need to define their terms, all right? So let's do that. And the first thing we're going to have to start with is liberalism. Because there are people in my community that are shocked when I use phrases like, our society is based on liberal ideology. Because they don't know what liberal ideology means, and they think it means the Democratic Party of the United States. As though to say, the concept of a liberal did not exist before, say, 1975. And that it's all just part of evil Marxists trying to take over the world through the use of Democrats who are against Marxists, by the way, but that's inconvenient to their worldview, so they don't think about it. They just sort of go with it. I'm not even talking about Republicans, by the way. I'm just talking about this asshole who lives down the way. The guy across the street over here, for me, it probably thinks this way. You don't know what the terms mean. If you're going to have an argument with somebody over the internet about something like this, you need to be able to define that term. What is the definition of liberalism before you start talking to other people about how the reason that something's wrong with them is because they're a liberal, and liberals don't understand private property rights. Liberalism is private property rights. That's why the idea of private property exists, is because of liberalism. Because before, no, I'm too frustrated. Slow down. I am not. Teachable moments. Teachable moments. Pretend to be the professor you're probably going to have to be eventually, whether you like it or not, and teach, Lampe. The ideas of John Locke, the founding fathers of the United States of America, of the French Revolution, of the French Revolution eventually. All of this is about the idea that an individual should have the basic human rights to life, liberty, and property. So that means that the government needs to have a very good reason to lock somebody up. A person is able to own something, and these certain inalienable rights cannot be trod upon, unless the person who is doing it is tyrannical when they are in governance. This idea is in radical juxtaposition to monarchism or feudalism, where the idea is that the powers that be are the way that they are because people are born into a position that makes it right and proper, which means that the only way that somebody has any kind of property is because the right to that property is ordained by blood or God. An individual doesn't own anything, not really. A power structure defends the notion that a noble owns something because he's got a fucking army. And if you disagree with him, his army can kill you and everybody else because you do not have an army. The other noble might have an army, and they might kill each other over whether or not they control whatever it is they supposedly control. That's how it worked before these people came along and said, okay, what if some people have rights just because they exist? The humanism concept of liberalism. So evolving out of that, you have things like freedom of speech, because you can't have a liberal society that is democratic in nature if people aren't allowed to communicate. And when I say communicate, I mean Habermasian communication. I mean communication where a person might have the possibility of something they say or do reaching the level of John Locke, where an entire society is repeating variations on the things that they've had to say because of the influence it has had on that society, right? That being said, the founding fathers controlled the media of this country when they built it. There was nobody that wasn't a part of that was in newspapers that were intercolonial, right? Like, they controlled pretty much the whole story. So was there freedom of speech? I mean, they weren't stopping somebody else from starting a newspaper, but they had all the wealth and power in the country, unless you're talking about loyalists who either lost everything, left, were killed, or just sort of had to sit on their hands because they lost, right? So, like, it's a good question. We're not even going to be able to get into freedom of speech yet, because all of the things I've just said are the foundational principles of this nation. Everything else that I might have had to say springs out of that. Also, something else you should probably know. Extreme leftists are against liberalism because, in their view, liberalism led to fascism and leads to capitalism, which constantly leads to economic collapse and disaster over and over and over and over, and never-ending wars, which is the state of the U.S. right now. That's a problem with liberalism. So liberals aren't socialist. You can't talk that way. The words no longer have meaning when you use them the way that you use them, and that is not a conversation. Because the other side, especially if they happen to know what those words actually mean, don't know what you're talking about. That's one term. We have dozens to go. Maybe after about 13 of these, I can start talking to you about neoliberalism for real. Because Intro to Neoliberalism, one of the first and by far the biggest video I've ever made, despite the fact that its sound is totally horrible and I wasn't able to finish the music for it. The only real problem with that video is that nobody understands what I'm talking about because none of those terms have any meaning for them. So I have to start all over again. And that project I'm doing right now, I'm practicing the bullet points that are eventually going to lead to me being able to define neoliberalism for the average person who is already inculcated in its overwhelming control of the American zeitgeist. Thank you for your time.